A man sat alone in the corner of an empty diner, 2 plates of food in front of him. He stared at the second plate like he was waiting for someone who would never come. Then a voice broke the silence, shaking, desperate. "Excuse me, my son is hungry. Can we stay here a while?" What happens when a grieving dad's lonely ritual collides with a mother's desperate plea? He looked up. A thin woman stood near the door, a small boy hiding behind her legs. The child's eyes held fear and hunger in equal measure. The man didn't know that his answer would open a story both of them had been searching for all along. The diner had been Marcus' Friday night ritual for 3 years now. Same corner booth, same 2 plates, same silence that felt heavier than any talk. He was 42, though people said he looked older. The kind of tired that settles into your bones and doesn't leave. He worked as a mechanic, fixing motorcycles in a small shop on the east side of town. Good with his hands, quiet with his words, the kind of man people forgot about the moment he left a room, except on Friday nights when he became the man everyone pitied. The waitress, an older woman named Betty, knew better than to ask questions anymore. She'd bring 2 plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, set them down without a word, and leave him alone. The first few times she tried to talk to him, asked if someone was joining him. Marcus had just looked at the empty seat across from him, and said nothing. After a while, she stopped asking. The second plate was for his son, a boy who would have been 10 years old now if the pickup truck had stopped at the red light 3 years ago. A boy who used to love Friday night dinners at this exact booth, who would always order extra gravy and make a mess of the table. The small blue backpack still hung on the edge of the booth. Marcus never moved it. Sometimes he'd reach over and touch the strap just to remember what it felt like to have someone to take care of. People in the neighborhood knew his story. They'd look at him with that careful kind of sympathy that made him feel like a ghost. Some avoided him entirely. Others would nod and say nothing, which was worse somehow. A few had told him to move on, to let go, to stop hurting himself with these weekly dinners. But they didn't understand. This wasn't pain. This was the only hour of the week when his son still felt real. Tonight was no different. Marcus sat with his hands folded on the table, staring at the untouched plate in front of the empty seat. The meatloaf was getting cold. He'd wait another 10 minutes like always, then ask Betty to box it up. He'd take it home and throw it away. Same as every week. But then the door opened. A woman stepped inside, thin and pale, wearing a coat 2 sizes too big. Behind her, half hidden, was a boy maybe 6 years old. His clothes were dirty. His face smudged with something that might have been tears or just tiredness. The woman didn't come all the way in. She stood near the doorway, looking around like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there. The boy clung to her leg. Betty saw them and frowned. She walked over, drying her hands on her apron. "Can I help you?" she asked, not unkindly, but with the tone of someone who'd seen too many people come in without money. The woman's voice was barely a whisper. "We're just... Is it okay if we sit down for a minute? Just to rest?" Betty glanced at the boy, then back at the woman. "This is a restaurant, hun. You need to order something if you want to sit." "I know. I just..." The woman's voice cracked. "We don't have anything right now. I'm sorry." Betty's expression softened, but she didn't move. "I can't let you stay if you're not ordering. Owner's rules." The boy looked up at his mother, and something in his eyes. Hunger, fear, shame, hit Marcus like a fist to the chest. He stood up before he could think about it. "They're with me," he said. Betty turned, surprised. The woman looked at him like she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Marcus gestured to the booth. "Come sit down." The woman hesitated. "We can't. We don't want to bother you." "You're not," Marcus said. He looked at the boy. Then at the second plate of food growing cold on the table. "Please." The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. She guided her son to the booth, and they slid into the seat across from Marcus. The boy stared at the plate of food like it was a dream. Marcus pushed it toward him. "Go ahead." The boy looked at his mother. She nodded, her hand trembling as she touched his shoulder. He picked up the fork and started eating fast and desperate, like he wasn't sure the food would still be there if he slowed down. The woman wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "We'll pay you back. I promise." Marcus shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." Betty brought over a glass of water and set it in front of the boy without a word. She met Marcus's eyes for just a moment. Something unreadable passing between them, then walked away. For a while no one spoke. The boy ate. The woman kept her head down, her hands folded in her lap like she was praying. Marcus watched them and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years, something that wasn't emptiness. But could one act of kindness pull him from the edge of despair, or drag him into danger? When the boy finally slowed down, his plate nearly clean, he looked up at Marcus with wide, grateful eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. Marcus's throat tightened. The boy's voice sounded so much like his son's. The woman reached across the table, hesitant. "I'm Claire," she said. "And this is Daniel." Marcus nodded. "Marcus." She tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "We don't usually. We're not usually like this. We just..." She trailed off, looking down at her hands. "Things got hard. We're trying to figure it out." Marcus didn't ask for details. He'd learned a long time ago that some stories were too heavy to tell to strangers. "Where are you staying?" he asked instead. Claire's face tightened. We'll find somewhere." That meant nowhere. Marcus looked at Daniel, who was leaning against his mother's side now, his eyes starting to close. The boy looked so small, so tired. He thought about the second plate, about the empty seat, about the 3 years he'd spent pretending his son was still sitting there. Maybe it was time to stop pretending. "I have a shop," Marcus said. "I fix motorcycles. There's a small room in the back. Not much, but it's dry and it's warm. You can stay there. Just for tonight." Claire's eyes went wide. "We couldn't." "It's not charity," Marcus said, cutting her off gently. "I just have the space, and it's cold out." She looked at him like she was trying to figure out if he was real. Then she looked at Daniel, who'd fallen asleep against her shoulder, and something in her broke. "Okay," she whispered. "Just for tonight." Marcus paid the bill and led them out to his truck. Daniel was half asleep, stumbling, so Marcus picked him up without thinking. The boy was light, too light, and he smelled like rain and unwashed clothes. Claire climbed into the passenger seat, and they drove in silence through the empty streets. The shop was only 10 minutes away. A squat brick building with a metal garage door and a faded sign that said Marcus Motors. Inside, it smelled like oil and metal and old concrete. Marcus led them past the motorcycles in various states of repair through a narrow hallway to a small room in the back. It had a cot, a space heater, and a pile of old blankets. "It's not much," Marcus said, setting Daniel down on the cot. The boy didn't wake up. Claire stood in the doorway, looking around like she still couldn't believe this was happening. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus didn't know how to answer that. He looked at the boy, curled up on the cot, and thought about the blue backpack hanging in the diner booth. "Because someone should," he said finally. Claire's eyes filled with tears again, but this time she didn't wipe them away. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus nodded and turned to leave. But as he reached the door, Claire spoke again. "I will pay you back," she said, her voice stronger now. "I don't know how, but I will." Marcus looked back at her. "You don't have to." But even as he said it, he wondered if maybe she wasn't the only one who needed saving. He didn't know that this decision, this one moment of saying yes instead of no, would unravel everything he thought he knew about grief, about family, about what it meant to keep living when the person you loved most was gone. He didn't know that by opening his door, he was about to step into the hardest and most important chapter of his life. All he knew was that for the first time in 3 years, the second plate hadn't gone to waste. Claire and Daniel stayed for 3 days before Marcus realized they had nowhere else to go. He hadn't asked. She hadn't offered. But on the 4th morning, when he came into the shop early and found Claire already awake, scrubbing the oil stains off the concrete floor with a rag and a bucket of soapy water, he understood. "You don't have to do that," Marcus said. Claire looked up, her hands red and raw. "I need to do something. You've already done too much." Daniel was still asleep in the back room, curled under the pile of blankets. Marcus could see him through the doorway, small and still. "You looking for work?" Marcus asked. Claire stood up, wiping her hands on her jeans. "I'll take anything." He made a call to Betty at the diner. She needed someone in the kitchen washing dishes and prepping vegetables. It didn't pay much, but it was something. Claire started the next day. Marcus told himself it was temporary. A week, maybe two, just until she got back on her feet. But weeks turned into a month, and Claire and Daniel became part of the rhythm of his life in a way he hadn't expected. Daniel would sit in the corner of the shop after school doing homework on an overturned crate, while Marcus worked on engines. Sometimes the boy would ask questions. Why did motorcycles need oil? How did the gears work? What made them go fast? Marcus answered them all, surprised at how easy it was to talk to a child again. Claire worked long hours at the diner, but she always came back to the shop at night. She'd bring leftovers from the kitchen, and the three of them would eat together in the back room. It wasn't much, but it felt like something Marcus hadn't had in years. It felt like a routine, like a life. But the neighbors noticed. Mrs. Callahan from the apartment building next door was the first to say something. She cornered Marcus one afternoon, while he was carrying groceries from his truck. "I don't mean to pry," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But that woman and her boy, they've been here a while now, haven't they?" Marcus shifted the grocery bag in his arms. "They needed a place to stay." Mrs. Callahan's lips pressed into a thin line. "People talk, Marcus. A single man and a woman who's clearly running from something. It doesn't look right." "I'm not worried about how it looks," Marcus said. But after she walked away, he found himself wondering if maybe he should be. The whispers started small. A few glances at the diner when Claire served tables. A comment from one of Marcus's customers about the boy who was always hanging around the shop. Nothing outright cruel, but enough to remind him that people were watching. Then one evening, Betty pulled him aside after he'd come to pick up Claire. "I like her," Betty said, nodding toward Claire, who was wiping down the counter. "She works hard. But you need to be careful, Marcus." "Careful of what?" Betty glanced around, then lowered her voice. "People are saying things about you too, about why she's staying with you." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "She's staying because she has nowhere else to go." "I know that," Betty said gently. "But not everyone does. And some folks, they think you're either being taken advantage of or you're taking advantage. Either way, it's not going to end well if you're not careful." Marcus wanted to argue, but he couldn't because late at night when he lay awake in his apartment above the shop, he'd started asking himself the same questions. Was he helping Claire because it was the right thing to do? Or was he using her and Daniel to fill the hole his son had left behind? He didn't have an answer. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Daniel had been quiet all afternoon, sitting in his usual corner, but not doing his homework. When Claire came to pick him up, the boy's face was flushed, his eyes glassy. "He's warm," Claire said, pressing her hand to his forehead. Her voice was tight with worry. Marcus touched Daniel's forehead. The heat radiating from the boy's skin sent a spike of fear through his chest. "We need to take him to the hospital." Claire's face went pale. "I don't have insurance." "I can't." "I'll pay," Marcus said, already grabbing his keys. They drove to the emergency room in silence. Daniel slumped against his mother in the back seat. Marcus gripped the steering wheel and tried not to think about the last time he'd been in a hospital 3 years ago, when the doctors had told him there was nothing they could do. At the ER, they waited for 2 hours before a doctor finally examined Daniel. The boy had a fever of 103 degrees, a bad infection that needed antibiotics. The doctor wrote a prescription and told them to monitor him closely. The bill came to $470. Marcus paid it without hesitation. On the drive back, Claire cried silently in the passenger seat. Daniel was asleep in the back, the fever already starting to break thanks to the medicine. I can't keep doing this to you, Claire said, her voice barely audible. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. You're not doing anything to me. Yes, I am. She wiped her face with her sleeve. You've given us a place to stay, helped me find work, and now this, and I have nothing to give you back. I don't want anything back. Claire turned to look at him, her eyes red and swollen. Why are you doing this, Marcus? Really? Because no one just helps people like this. Not without wanting something. Marcus didn't answer right away. He thought about the blue backpack still hanging in the diner booth, about the second plate of food he'd ordered every Friday for 3 years, about the way Daniel's laugh sounded so much like his son's. Because you needed help, he said finally. And because I know what it's like to feel like the world forgot about you. Claire stared at him for a long moment, then looked away. I had a daughter, she said quietly. Before Daniel. She was born too early. Lived for 3 days. Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel. Her name was Emma. Claire continued. And when she died, my husband blamed me. Said it was my fault for not taking care of myself. For being too stressed, he started drinking. Then he started hitting me. She looked down at her hands. I stayed for 2 years because I didn't know where else to go. Then one night, he hit Daniel and I knew we had to leave. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. I'm sorry. I'm not telling you this for pity, Claire said. I'm telling you because I need you to understand. I know what it's like to lose someone. And I know what it's like to feel like you're using someone else to fill that space. She looked at him, her eyes fierce despite the tears. So if that's what you're doing, if you're helping us because Daniel reminds you of your son, I need you to tell me now because I can't let him get attached to someone who's going to disappear when they realize he's not a replacement. Marcus pulled the truck over to the side of the road. He turned off the engine and sat there staring at the dashboard. I lost my son 3 years ago, he said. His voice felt like gravel. Drunk driver ran a red light. He was 7. And yeah, when I look at Daniel, I see him. I hear him. And for the first time in 3 years, I don't feel like I'm drowning. He looked at Claire. So maybe you're right. Maybe I am using you. But I don't think that's all this is. Because when I look at you, I don't see someone I'm trying to save. I see someone who's trying to save herself. And I think maybe we're both just trying to figure out how to keep going. Claire's eyes filled with tears again. But this time she didn't. Look away. I don't want to hurt him, she whispered. Or you. Then don't leave, Marcus said. Not yet. Not until we figure this out. She nodded. And they sat there in the truck, the engine ticking as it cooled, Daniel asleep in the back seat. But the peace didn't last. 2 weeks later, a man showed up at the shop. Marcus was under a motorcycle, his hands covered in grease when he heard the garage door open. He slid out from under the bike and saw a man standing in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been in too many fights. Can I help you? Marcus asked, standing up. The man looked around the shop, his eyes cold. I'm looking for my wife. Marcus's stomach dropped. I think you've got the wrong place. Claire Patterson, the man said. And my son, Daniel. Someone told me they've been staying here. Marcus didn't. If they were here, I don't think they'd want to see you. The man's jaw tightened. That's not your decision to make. She's my wife. He's my son. And I'm taking them home. She's not your wife anymore, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. And she left because you hurt her. The man stepped closer, his hands curling into fists. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough. They stared at each other, the air thick with tension. Then the man smiled, and it was the ugliest thing Marcus had ever seen. You think you're some kind of hero? The man said. Playing house with my family. She's using you, buddy. And when she's done, she'll leave you just like she left me. Marcus didn't flinch. Get out of my shop. The man didn't move. I'll be back with a lawyer if I have to. And when I am, you better hope you've got a good reason for keeping a man from his son. He turned and walked out, and Marcus stood there, his hand shaking, staring at the empty doorway. That night, Claire didn't come back to the shop. Marcus called the diner. Betty said Claire had left early, said she wasn't feeling well. He tried her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He drove to the motel on the edge of town. The only place he could think of where she might go. Her car was parked outside one of the rooms. He knocked on the door. No answer. Claire, it's Marcus. Open the door. After a long moment, the door cracked open. Claire stood there, her face pale, her eyes red. Daniel sat on the bed behind her, clutching a pillow. We have to go, Claire said. Her voice was flat. He found us. If we stay, he'll take Daniel or hurt you or both. Marcus shook his head. You can't run forever. I'm not running forever, Claire said. I'm just running now. She tried to close the door, but Marcus caught it. Let me help. You've already helped too much, Claire said, and there was something broken in her voice. And I can't keep dragging you into this. Marcus looked past her at Daniel, who was staring at him with wide, frightened eyes. The boy looked so small, so scared. Please, Marcus said. Just come back to the shop. We'll figure this out. Claire shook his head, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Marcus, for everything. She closed the door. Marcus stood there in the motel parking lot, the cold night air biting at his skin, and felt the familiar weight of loss settle over him like a blanket. He thought he was saving them, but maybe all he'd done was make things worse. The next morning, Marcus went to the shop and found a drawing on the workbench. It was done in crayon, the lines shaky but deliberate. 3 stick figures stood in front of a building that was clearly the shop. A tall man, a woman, and a small boy. At the bottom, in Daniel's careful handwriting, were 3 words. Thank you, Marcus. Marcus sat down on the floor, the drawing in his hands, and for the first time in 3 years he cried. Not because he'd lost someone, but because he'd found them, and now they were gone. Marcus sat in the empty shop for 2 days, staring at Daniel's drawing. He didn't work, didn't eat, just sat there with the crayon lines blurring in front of him until he couldn't tell if he was looking at the paper or just the memory of it. On the 3rd day, Betty called. Claire didn't show up for her shift, she said. Again, Marcus's chest tightened. Did she call? No, and her phone's been going straight to voicemail since yesterday. Betty's voice dropped lower. Marcus, I'm worried. This isn't like her. He was already reaching for his keys. The motel manager said Claire had checked out 2 days ago, paid in cash, didn't leave a forwarding address. Marcus drove to every motel, every shelter, every cheap hotel within 20 miles. No one had seen her. By nightfall, he was back at the shop, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles had gone white. He didn't know what to do. Didn't know where else to look. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a small, terrified voice. Marcus. His heart stopped. Daniel. The boy's words came out in a rush, barely coherent. He found us. Mom told me to hide, but I heard them fighting. And there's yelling, and I'm scared, and I don't know what to do. Where are you? Marcus was already starting the truck. The old apartment on Maple Street, the one with the blue door. Daniel's voice cracked. Please come. Please. The line went dead. Marcus drove faster than he should have, his mind racing through every terrible possibility. He knew Maple Street was on the south side, the kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business even when they shouldn't. He found the building, a sagging 2-story structure with peeling paint and broken gutters. The blue door was on the 1st floor, slightly ajar. Marcus pushed it open. The apartment was small and dark, the air thick with the smell of alcohol and something else. Fear. He heard voices from the back room. A man shouting, a woman pleading. Marcus moved quickly down the narrow hallway, his pulse hammering in his ears. The bedroom door was half open. Through the gap, he could see Claire backed against the wall, her lip bleeding, her hands raised in front of her face. The man, her ex-husband, stood over her, one fist clenched, the other holding her wrist in a grip that was turning her skin white. "You think you can just take my son and run?" the man was saying, his voice thick with rage. "You think some loser mechanic is going to protect you?" Marcus didn't think. He just moved. He shoved the door open and stepped inside. The man spun around, his eyes wild. For a moment, they just stared at each other. "Get out of my house," the man said. "Let her go," Marcus said. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Or what? You going to hit me? Go ahead. Give me a reason to call the cops and have you arrested." Marcus took a step forward. "I said, let her go." The man released Claire's wrist and turned fully toward Marcus. He was bigger, younger, and Marcus could see the coiled violence in his posture. This was a man who'd hurt people before and would do it again without hesitation. "You want to be a hero?" the man said, moving closer. "Fine, let's see how that works out for you." He swung. Marcus barely dodged the first punch. The second one caught him in the ribs, and he felt something crack. Pain exploded through his side, but he didn't go down. He shoved the man back hard and they crashed into the dresser. Claire screamed. Marcus heard footsteps in the hallway. Neighbors maybe, or just curious onlookers. The man swung again, and this time Marcus caught his arm, twisted it, and used the momentum to drive him into the wall. The man's head hit the plaster with a dull thud, and he staggered back, dazed. Marcus stood there breathing hard, his ribs screaming in protest. Then he heard the sirens. Someone had called the police. 2 officers arrived within minutes, their hands on their holsters as they stepped into the apartment. They separated Marcus and the ex-husband, took statements, examined Claire's bleeding lip and the bruises forming on her wrist. The ex-husband tried to spin a story about how Marcus had broken into his apartment, attacked him unprovoked, but the neighbors had heard the fighting. And when the officers found Daniel hiding in the closet, shaking and crying, the boy's testimony sealed it. They arrested the ex-husband for domestic assault. Read him his rights, let him out in handcuffs while he shouted threats over his shoulder. One of the officers, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, sat down with Claire at the kitchen table. "You need to file for a restraining order," she said gently. "And we'll need to document everything for the custody case." Claire nodded, her hands trembling. "I don't have a lawyer. I can't afford." "There are resources," the officer said. "Shelters, legal aid. I'll get you the information." She looked at Marcus, who was leaning against the wall, holding his ribs. "You should get that looked at." "I'm fine," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure that was true. The officer gave him a long, measuring look. "You did a good thing tonight. But you need to be smart about what comes next. Cases like this get complicated fast." After the police left, Marcus drove Claire and Daniel back to the shop. No one spoke. Daniel sat in the back seat, his face pale and streaked with tears. Claire stared out the window, her hand pressed against her mouth. Inside the shop, Marcus made them tea. Claire sat on the cot in the back room. Daniel curled up beside her, and they didn't move for a long time. Finally, Claire looked at Marcus. "Why did you come?" "Because Daniel called me." She closed her eyes. "I told him not to. I told him we'd be fine." "You weren't fine," Marcus said quietly. "I know." Her voice broke. "I thought if we just stayed away from you, he'd leave us alone. I thought I was protecting you." Marcus sat down on the floor, his back against the wall, his ribs throbbed with every breath. "You don't have to protect me." "Yes, I do." Claire looked at him, her eyes red. "Because if something happened to you because of us, I'd never forgive myself." Daniel stirred, lifting his head from his mother's lap. "You came," he said, looking at Marcus. His voice was small and fragile. "You came even though we left." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Of course I did. The boy started crying again, and Claire pulled him close, and Marcus sat there on the cold concrete floor, feeling like his heart was being torn in two. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers and court dates and paperwork. Marcus used every connection he had, called in every favor. He vouched for Claire, offered the shop as a stable residence, wrote letters testifying to her character. The community surprisingly rallied. Betty wrote a letter. Mrs. Callahan, despite her earlier misgivings, spoke to the judge about Claire's work ethic and Marcus' kindness. Even some of Marcus' customers stepped forward. People who'd seen Claire and Daniel at the shop and could attest that they were being cared for. It wasn't easy. The ex-husband fought for custody, hired a lawyer, tried to paint Claire as an unfit mother, but the evidence was against him: the police reports, the hospital records, Daniel's own testimony. In the end, the judge granted Claire full custody with a 5-year restraining order. The ex-husband was ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from Claire and Daniel at all times. When the verdict came down, Claire broke down in the courthouse hallway. Not from relief, though that was part of it, but from the weight of everything she'd been carrying finally lifting. Marcus stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, and didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. That night, they went back to the shop. Daniel fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the long day. Claire and Marcus sat in the main work area surrounded by tools and motorcycle parts, drinking coffee that had gone cold. "I don't know how to thank you," Claire said. "You don't have to." She looked at him. Really looked at him. "You could have walked away so many times, but you didn't." Marcus stared at his hands. "I tried to that night at the motel. I thought maybe I was making things worse." "You weren't. I know that now." He looked up at her. "But I also know that I wasn't just helping you. I was helping myself. And I'm not sure that makes me a good person." Claire shook her head. "It makes you human. We both lost children. We both know what it's like to feel like the world ended and kept going anyway. And maybe we found each other because we needed to learn how to live with that." She was right. Marcus knew she was right, but it still felt complicated, messy, like they were both using each other and healing each other at the same time. "What happens now?" he asked. "I don't know," Claire said. "But I think we figure it out together." 3 months later, Marcus went back to the diner on a Friday night, but this time he wasn't alone. Claire sat across from him and Daniel sat in the seat where the blue backpack used to hang. The backpack was still there. Marcus hadn't moved it, but now there was a second one beside it, red and new, belonging to Daniel. Betty brought 3 plates of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. She set them down with a knowing smile and didn't say a word. They ate together, the 3 of them, and the diner felt warmer somehow. Less like a place Marcus came to remember the past, and more like a place where the future was beginning. Daniel talked about school, about a science project he was working on. Claire talked about her new job at a better restaurant downtown, one with benefits and decent pay. Marcus listened and realized he was smiling. Really smiling. For the first time in years. After dinner, they walked back to the truck. The night was cold, the stars bright overhead. Daniel ran ahead, his red backpack bouncing on his shoulders. Claire walked beside Marcus, their hands almost touching, but not quite. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For the dinner, for everything." Marcus looked at her. "You know, you don't have to keep thanking me." "I know," she said. "But I want to." They drove back to the shop in comfortable silence. Daniel fell asleep in the back seat, his head resting against the window. Claire looked back at him, her expression soft. "He asked me the other day if you were going to be his dad," she said. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that family doesn't always look the way we expect it to. But that doesn't make it any less real." Marcus didn't respond. He couldn't because the truth was he didn't know what they were. Didn't know if he could ever be a father again or if Claire could ever be more than someone he'd helped. But he knew this. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel alone. And maybe that was enough. Back at the shop, Marcus carried Daniel inside and laid him on the cot. The boy didn't wake up. Claire covered him with a blanket and stood there for a moment watching him sleep. Marcus stood in the doorway and Claire turned to look at him. "Stay," she said. Not a question. Just a simple request. So he did. They sat together in the workshop, surrounded by the smell of oil and metal, and talked about nothing important, about the weather, about Daniel's science project, about the new coffee shop that had opened down the street. And slowly, without either of them noticing, the conversation shifted. They talked about the people they'd lost, about the children they'd never stop missing, about the guilt and the grief and the impossibility of moving forward when part of you was still stuck in the past. "I used to think I'd never feel whole again," Claire said. "Like there was this piece of me missing that I could never get back." "And now?" Marcus asked. She looked at him. "Now, I think maybe that's okay. Maybe we're not supposed to be whole. Maybe we're just supposed to keep going anyway." Marcus thought about his son, about the blue backpack, about the second plate of food he'd ordered every Friday for 3 years. He thought about the hole that loss had left in his chest, and how it would never fully close. But also how it had made room for something new, something unexpected. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Maybe you're right." Outside, the city slept. Inside the shop, 2 broken people sat together in the dim light, learning how to breathe again. And that was enough. Because grief doesn't disappear. It just learns to share space with hope, with kindness, with the small, stubborn belief that even when the world takes everything from you, there's still a reason to keep showing up. Marcus didn't replace his son. Claire didn't forget her daughter, but they learned that you can hold on to what you've lost and still reach for what's in front of you. Family isn't always the people you're born with. Sometimes it's the people who show up when you need them most. The ones who sit with you in the dark and don't try to fix you. The ones who understand that healing isn't about moving on. It's about learning to carry your grief without letting it crush you. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, healing looks like a single father sitting in a diner with 2 plates of food, waiting for someone who will never come until one day someone